This is a GIS story map, so it is accessible to everyone. I've included the link in the chat, so you can click on it and follow along if you want. I also want to state that this story map is meant to be used even after the presentation. So there's way more in here than what I can cover in just 15 minutes. I'm going to be scrolling fast over many different areas, but I really want to welcome you all to come back and just read through this when you get some time. I'm also going to be providing the link to this presentation that I'm giving right now, as well as to my thesis document once they've both been publicly available into this story map. And what I wanted to know is what invasive species had the most impact on salmon habitat, how much research was available on their impacts, and how to bring that information to everybody, because salmon habitat is important. And real quick, I want to show you how I cite some of my sources in this story map. So there's a little eye that's for photos and figures. It'll tell you either the name of the photographer or it'll give a link to where I got the figure from. And then I also have my sources with a line, underline that you can click on. Those will bring you to where I got those sources as well. But salmon are a keystone species. They provide many different types of ecosystem services. They are especially important for distributing nutrients to places that need them. But unfortunately, their numbers have been steadily declining over the years. And this is partly because noxious weeds have become more and more of a problem. And in fact, it's quite often that we're not even aware of their presence until they're already growing out of control, at which point they're already causing various levels of stress on salmon habitat, either by crowding out native species or by degrading water quality. And so I wanted to look at Western Washington because it has many salmon streams that come in from the Pacific Ocean, as well as wonderful growing conditions for a variety of floral species, especially for noxious weeds. And I learned that in the 19 Western Washington counties that I looked at, there are 600 locations of just the 4 invasive vegetative species that I focused on. And this data is coming from EDD maps. And because I wanted to learn more about invasive vegetation impacts on salmon habitat, I've also included some photos in here to show what the various salmon species that I focused on look like. These are some photos of Chinook salmon. These are some chum salmon. These are photos of coho. Some photos of pink salmon. Some photos of sockeye. And some steelhead, as well as some other salmon photos as well. Now we've arrived to our first of 3 interactive maps. This is one of 3 maps that will eventually build on each other. It shows the various salmon streams that are within Western Washington, and the layers can be toggled on or off, so I could turn all of them off and I can just click and just look at one stream layer if I want to. There's even pop-ups that you can bring up that show the name and the runtime or stream segments for each of the species. You can also like zoom to the different counties and the bookmarks. And then in the interest of time, I'm not going to go over it too much, but I've also included how to best use all that this map has to offer. Each map has a section like this. It's just underneath the map. So when you're looking at this, you can really take advantage of all of what the map has to offer. To assess the impacts of noxious weeds on salmon habitat, I consulted the Washington Administrative Code, and I looked at the salmon spawning and rearing and migration information for my baseline data. And then I conducted a survey, and I used the survey to narrow down the 52 Washington state noxious weeds to a more manageable top 4. And from the survey results, I got knotweed as number 1, then reed canary grass, followed by yellow flag iris and Brazilian Elodea. And within that survey, I asked each of the respondents why they had chose each of those species as a priority to better understand what made each choice stand out above the others, and I got really great responses. For instance, knotweed, 80% of the knotweed respondents said that it outcompetes native species, reduces biodiversity. 60% says that it grows rapidly. 40% said that it's common along streams. 20% that it's costly to manage, and 10% of knotweed respondents talked about water turbidity or increased flooding events. Again, in the interest of time, I'm not going to go over each species, but I also have my survey results from the reed canary grass, yellow flag iris, and Brazilian Elodea as well. And I also wanted to know how much research on each species was perceived to be available in meeting the surveyors' agency's needs. And from this figure, you can see that a lot of the people that took their survey felt strongly in the amount of available research for knotweed. Some of them felt strongly about reed canary grass, but yellow flag iris and Brazilian Elodea appear to be kind of understudied. And when I did the research for my thesis on noxious weed impacts on salmon habitat, I found these rough figures to be about accurate, where knotweed has more information available, but Brazilian Elodea could definitely use more research. All in all, even though I looked extensively at the literature, there's still more questions that remain, and it's important to keep researching these noxious weeds and their impacts. Because it's so important to learn about these invasive species, I've also wanted to include identifying photos that show each of the species as well. So in order of how they were ranked, I'm starting with photos of Japanese knotweed. And then these are photos of reed canary grass. This is what yellow flag iris looks like. And this is the Brazilian Elodea. This brings us to the second of the 3 interactive maps. This map is very similar to the first one I just showed with the salmon streams, where the layers can be toggled on or off. There's pop-ups that talk about the common and scientific name, when it was observed, if there were any comments that happened to be with the species, who reviewed it, and whether or not it was verified to be present. So there's data on that as well. And then I've also included a brief summary of my findings. This isn't everything that's in my thesis, and I'm about to summarize this even farther in the interest of time, but I want to give you a brief overview of what I found. So with knotweed, it outcompetes native vegetation. It grows aggressively, forming monocultures, is especially harmful by triggering erosion. It can take nutrients out of its leaves before they fall, leaving less nutrients to go back into the surrounding area. And because it outcompetes native trees, it prevents future downwoody debris recruitment, which salmon would use for shelter. This is a photo of erosion that is caused by knotweed, and all of the sediment that you can see here is about to flow into the water, which is also harmful to salmon. Next, we have reed canary grass. Reed canary grass also dominates the landscape, preventing native plants from establishing themselves, potentially decreasing overall biodiversity. And one study found that this grass was beneficial to a native frog population. It still does not necessarily benefit salmon though, as I've not yet found a study that says salmon eat frogs, and they could be competing for the same food source. Reed canary grass also traps sediment in its root mats, as well as alters stream temperatures by impeding water flow. Reed canary grass can also be habitat for another invasive fish, the northern pike, which is seen here having just gorged on a ton of baby salmon, one of the pike's preferred prey species. Then we have yellow flag iris. Like the other species, it forms monocultures, aggressively outcompeting its neighbors. It is toxic to both animals and humans. Yellow flag iris can dominate the area so much that it can narrow the waterway, making the salmon stream channel much harder to navigate. This is a photo showing yellow flag iris dominating and essentially leading to clogging of the waterway. And last, we have Brazilian Elodea. This is kind of confusing because while the common name is Brazilian Elodea, it's not truly a species of Elodea. Its taxonomic designation actually places it in the genus Ageria, which is what I'm going to call it for this presentation, just to avoid confusion. It's another aggressive competitor when conditions for the species are optimal. Ageria does not necessarily contribute sediment by erosion, but it does trap sediment at high rates of deposition. It's also been known to alter the chemicals in streams, such as by depleting dissolved oxygen as it dies. There's also cascading effects that are associated with Ageria's seasonal growth cycles. First, by altering the stream chemistry during senescence, which can alter macroinvertebrate abundancy and diversity, and that ultimately affects the survival of salmon. It can also restrict water flow, which can lead to warmer stream temperatures that also impact salmon. And Ageria has been known to provide habitat to salmon predators, such as the non-native largemouth bass and the native northern pike minnow. And this is a photo of two Agerias where the invasive Ageria densa, the one that I've been talking about, is the most abundant one in the image. And this map, the third and final interactive map, my favorite because it's a combination of the first two that I've showed you, is really cool. On the left here, it's a swipe map, but on the left, we see all of the IVS locations and all of the salmon streams from the data that I gathered off online. And then I did a 200-foot buffer of the IVS and salmon streams within each to each other. And so here you can see that 200-foot buffer totals there. And then for all of Western Washington, I have the totals in bold for what's on the left, and then the 200-foot total amounts the 200-foot buffer total amounts down below. I also have, in order of alphabetical order for the 19 counties that I looked at, up here there's numbers that range 1 through 20. So 2 through 20 are the counties. And say you wanted to zoom into Thurston County, that's number 18. If I click on number 18 right here, it zooms into Thurston County, and you can use this swipe feature again to see the total presence versus the presence within 200 feet of each other. And it has the Thurston County totals as well as the 200-foot buffer totals for Thurston County. And there's also a legend that's down here in the lower left. Oh yeah, and then in conclusion, it's important to manage each of these invasive vegetative species in order to improve salmon habitat. And even if you don't work in this field, you can still download this app and report what you find, because honestly, this truly works better when we all work together. And speaking of working together, I would like to end on my acknowledgements, because I couldn't have done this without the help of so many wonderful people. And I really want to give a shout out to all of these orange names and my contact information. So thank you.